This Saturday night, to conclude college football's regular season, we have the 2024 Big Ten Championship game. And the first edition of the Big Ten Championship game were the top two teams in conference standings, not the division leaders, the top two teams in conference standings match up. So it is a new Big Ten Championship game, and the participants are new themselves. This is a unique matchup that we have never seen before in the Big Ten Championship game between conference newcomers, number one, undefeated at 12-0, the Oregon Ducks, coached by Dan Lanning, who I think is a top 5 head coach in college football right now. And the other participant is the fourth-ranked, 11-1 Penn State Nittany Lions, led by James Franklin, who has put together his best regular season ever with Penn State. First ever 11-1 regular season showing for the Nittany Lions under James Franklin. It's his second time in the Big Ten Championship game. The first time he and his Nittany Lions appeared in Indianapolis was in 2016, where they beat the Wisconsin Badgers. Penn State is an unexpected guest at the dinner table here. Ohio State was a massive favorite to not only appear in Indianapolis and rematch with Oregon, but to beat Oregon in Indianapolis. Early lines suggested that Ohio State was going to be favored by about 3.5 points, and yet they lost to Michigan. They lost a game in which they were 3-touchdown favorites, and consequently they dropped behind Penn State and Indiana, who they beat in the regular season. But with 2 conference losses to Oregon and Michigan, they finished 4th. Indiana finished 3rd because Penn State's regular season Big Ten Conference resume was more impressive. They had a harder strength of schedule by combined opponent, in-conference opponent win percentage. You look at the spreads here. Oregon opened up as a 3-point favorite. The line has moved to Oregon minus 3.5. But hold on a second, because per ESPN's Football Power Index, Penn State is the favorite to win this matchup. They are given a 53.7% chance to win this game, again, per ESPN's FPI. Before we get any deeper in this matchup, in the Big Ten Championship game, which again takes place at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific Time, it's being streamed on CBS, unlike Fox for the previous several years that it has partnered with the Big Ten Championship game. I encourage you to score a touchdown for college football with Sam. And what I mean by that is fulfill these 7 points, or at least 6 of them. The extra points optional. Subscribe to the channel. Like the video. Comment your thoughts down below. Share this video around. Hit the notification bell. Comment. Again, I encourage you to comment your prediction and any analysis or points of interest you have for this game. You probably see something that I don't, and some of your comments may spur further research of mine that I could include in my deep dive, where I am going to come back and, excuse me, I am a little bit plugged up, a little bit sick here still, like I was last week, but we fight on, just like these two teams. This is why Penn State is an Indy, because they fought on. They didn't lose to any bad opponent like OSU did. And Oregon's undefeated. They won all of their games. They did their job to the best degree possible. It's why these two teams are here, because they fought on. And I think they are going to fight in this game, and this is going to be a battle. But again, subscribe, like the video, comment, hit the notification bell, share the video around, especially join our Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, where we talk college football 24/7. We'd love to have more Oregon fans and Penn State fans, more college football fans in general. And if you want to support the channel monetarily, check out the Patreon page or the merchandise store and make your purchases there via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. And what you could also do is just super chat via YouTube. But let's talk about this game here in a more broad analytical sense, and then we'll get into the matchups and the different position groups and also my prediction. So, per Football Power Index, Penn State is favored to win this game. I think that they include travel in their variables, because Oregon is viewed as a superior team to Penn State on a neutral field. They are. You look at FPI, Oregon is ranked, I think, 6th, and Penn State is 9th. You look at S&P Plus, Oregon's ahead of Penn State, and you look at My Potential Power Index, which is what that PPI abbreviation is, and in all of those, and in every power ratings metric, I believe, in all of them, Oregon is better than Penn State, just not by that much. But you factor in travel, and I did that for all of these ratings. For my potential power index, there's a specific number for the amount of travel that is done in miles, time zone, etc. I don't know how FPI or S&P Plus does that, but I just added a point in favor of Penn State in both of those models because Penn State doesn't have to travel any time zones over. Indianapolis is in the same time zone as they're in the same time zone as Pennsylvania. And as for Oregon, well, Oregon, the state, is 2 time zones away from Indianapolis, which is in the Eastern time zone. So factoring that in, per FPI, Penn State's favored by about 0.6 points, again with 1 point for Penn State because of their fewer miles and time zones traveled. For S&P Plus, Oregon is still favored by 2.2 points, even factoring in that point for Penn State. And for the potential power index, Penn State is favored by 1.7 points. So Penn State, Oregon, they are pretty similar teams in terms of overall power ratings. And as we will dive into, in terms of what they are good at and what they're bad at, they're actually a little bit similar there too. These teams are similarly built. They're pretty well-rounded on both sides of the football. I think I really do believe this. I think the reason why Oregon beat OSU and Penn State didn't is because the Penn State-Ohio State matchup is familiar to OSU. Oregon-Ohio State was not. And I also think that Dan Lanning, as we'll talk about, is a better coach than James Franklin is. Also, I think there is a mental edge in favor of OSU over PSU that Oregon and Ohio State don't have because they've never played each other before. So I think there were a lot of reasons, along with the fact that Penn State does not have the same explosive wide receiver talent as the Ducks do. Again, we'll get into that in a few minutes, that helped Ohio State beat Penn State and did not help them beat Oregon because they lost to the Oregon Ducks by 1 on the road. Travel is also factored into that as well. But I think Penn State and Oregon are elite teams relative to this year. Right now, they're top 4 teams, in my opinion. In fact, I'll give you a little bit of a hint because I'm going to make a video on this as well. They're my top 2 teams in football right now. I think the Big Ten championship game is between the 2 best teams in college football here. Penn State, they have a 0.279 points per play margin. They've entered the top 10 in that area. That means for one of Penn State's plays compared to one of their opponent's plays, they score 0.279 more points. They overperform their expected points added margin, which is a 0.205. So they're more efficient than what averages or numbers would say they're expected to be. And of course, that's kind of, well, redundant because numbers or expected points added, which is how many points are you expected to score depending on field position, well, that depends on a lot more than just field position. But this shows that Penn State is not only good at moving the football, which is kind of what EPA is in a certain sense, they're good at scoring points and preventing their opponents from scoring points as well. It's the same thing with Oregon, by the way. 0.292 points per play margin, 0.227 EPA margin. A little bit better than Penn State, just a little bit in both of those areas, but not by that much. We also talk about strength of schedule because that can be very important in a game like this. And then there's game control and ESPN's efficiency metrics. Penn State has faced the 36th toughest strength of schedule. Oregon's faced the 60th. There's not a big difference there, but it is something to keep in mind. Oregon is 6th in game control. Penn State is 14th. And Penn State's 9th in efficiency. Oregon is 5th in efficiency. Penn State has been pretty low on the game control edge for the entire season. And I think a big part of the reason why that is in terms of yards and in terms of yards per play and in terms of the eye test, they're extremely impressive. But in terms of them actually dominating their opponents by the box score or by points, which is what matters, like by point margin of victory, they have been very inconsistent all season long. For example, beating Bowling Green by 7 or only beating Illinois by 14 and only leading them for much of the second half by 7 despite statistically dominating them They're a team that, especially early in the year, was not that good at finishing. It's the same thing right here. Like, they struggle with finishing drives, but it's getting better as the year has gone on. That's why their game control has gone up even after that loss to OSU. Or entering the OSU game, they were around the 20 spot in game control. They've been rising ever since that because they're better at scoring touchdowns. They do a better job of being consistent in all four quarters and not just kind of bipolar in the first half as opposed to the second. Oregon has never really had an issue controlling their opponents or executing against them outside of really the Idaho and Boise State games, which were in week 1 and week 2 and are pretty much forgotten and to a certain degree should be forgotten as well. I think the critical matchup in Indianapolis between the Oregon Ducks and the Penn State Nittany Lions is Drew Allar and Harrison Wallace III, Amari Evans and Julian Fleming, his running backs, Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen as receivers, Tyler Warren, who I think, look, and I'll probably make a video on this too, but no promises there. This is just an idea. I do think the Heisman ceremony this season, I truly believe it should be Tyler Warren, Travis Hunter, Ashton Jeanty. I don't know who the fourth person would be, if I got to be honest. I don't. I mean, part of me would honestly say Caleb Johnson should be fourth because he's literally the reason why Iowa's offense is what it is. But I'd have to think about that some more. But I do think Tyler Warren should be in that conversation because of how diverse and Swiss Army knife of a player he is. And he's elite, too. He's not just a jack of all trades, but also a master of none. He's a jack of all trades and a master of catching the football, of earning yards after contact. I mean, he is as close to Brock Bowers as you can get. I don't know if he's quite Brock Bowers, but I also know that Georgia has more talent than Penn State does. So, I mean, maybe he is Brock Bowers, and just because he doesn't have the same type of players on both sides of the football like Brock Bowers did, especially in 21 and 22, we won't know until he reaches the NFL. But he is an absolute weapon. It's him, it's Penn State's offensive line, Drew Shelton, Ole Vivega Ione, Nick Dawkins, Sal Wormley, Nolan Rucci filling in for the injured Anthony Dunco, who is such a huge part of that offensive line, one of their better run blockers. And they're facing off against Mateo Uiagalelei, Jamari Caldwell, Derek Harmon, Teodum Teoti, Amari Washington, that front for Oregon, Bryce Betcher, Jeffrey Bossa, the linebackers, and then Nico Reed, Tyshim Johnson, Kobe Savage, Jabbar Muhammad, and Brandon Johnson. I basically mentioned every position on the offense for Penn State, the defense for Oregon, and I did, but it's in the sense of Penn State's passing attack and all the different ways they use their weapons at every position, even at running back, to get involved in the passing attack and to be creative against an Oregon defense that has been getting better at getting to the quarterback and has they have a very impressive secondary, a good pass defense. They have one of the better performing secondaries in all of college football. They do. I think the Ohio State game was just a game where, because OSU was healthier on the O-line, and I think OSU had a pretty solid game plan in that game, and they have Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, they were just able to exploit some of Oregon's position groups where they are lacking in terms of raw talent and potential on defense. But that's because when Ohio State's passing offense is functioning at its peak and they can run the football, well, they have one of the best offenses in the country, and that's kind of a no-brainer. But Oregon's defense truly is one of the better defenses in the country. It's the same thing with Penn State. It's the same thing when you look at these offenses. Both of these offenses and defenses are top 15 in ESPN's efficiency. Oregon's offense is top 5. Their defense is top 15. Penn State, their offense is top 10. Their defense is top 10 in ESPN's efficiency. Like, they are well balanced on both sides of the football. And they've been very consistent throughout the year. Both of these teams have. Like, you compare to Indiana or Ohio State, the two teams behind these teams, Indiana's strength of schedule has been weaker throughout the year. And when you factor in that OSU game, how they perform against similarly talented teams or teams that are more talented but unbalanced versus a team that is as balanced as them but more talented, there's a wide flip-flop. Like, how they performed against OSU is very different compared to how they performed against Nebraska or even Michigan for a half. Penn State and Oregon have performed pretty similarly game by game by game by game. And these are very similar teams, but one difference between them is Penn State against Ohio State completely lacked explosiveness and consistency and execution in the passing game outside of maybe a few passes to Tyler Warren. Oregon, meanwhile, was able to take the top off of that defense. So using that 1 point as an area to sample, and then also looking at the UCLA game where Penn State just kind of slowly chewed UCLA and spit them out of their mouth. Oregon had some explosive plays there. That's really one of the differences between these teams. That's one of them. The other, which is something that I could talk about as another matchup, is how Penn State has done a better job of not just running the football, but also of, more importantly, stopping the run compared to Oregon's defense. Let's look at Penn State's offense here really quickly, and then also Oregon's defense, and then we'll get into quickly some positional comparisons. Penn State's offense scores 0.504 points per play. It's 16th. They average 13.3 yards per point, which is 42nd. Penn State does a very good job of moving the ball in between the 20s. But once they get in the red zone, they do kind of slow down and typically have to kick some field goals or make some hard decisions. Penn State scores 4.2 offensive touchdowns per game, which is 21st. They're 13th and 8th in red zone score attempts per game and scores per game, ahead of Oregon in those categories. But again, Oregon scores more touchdowns per game because they can create touchdowns outside of the red zone, which Penn State has struggled to do. You look at total offense. Penn State averages 442.8 yards per game, 15th. They average 6.7 yards per play, which is 5th. They average 5.1 yards per carry, which is 23rd, and 194.7 rushing yards per game, which is also 23rd. And they average 9.2 yards per pass attempt, 6th, and 12.8 yards per completion, 39th. Again, both higher than Oregon in those categories, where Oregon is 12th in yards per attempt, 59th in yards per completion. Oregon's defense, they allow opponents to average 3.7 yards per carry on the ground and 118.2 yards. They allow opponents to average 4.5 yards per play and 290 yards per game, where they are top 10 in both, but Penn State's top 5 in both. Oregon allows opponents to score 16.4 points per game, which is 9th, and 0.252 opponent points per play, which is 8th. We'll talk about Penn State's defense and Oregon's offense just a little bit, just to make sure that we equally cover these teams statistically. But those units are the critical matchup, I think, especially Oregon's passing defense against Penn State's passing offense. And speaking of passing defense, before I forget, Oregon, they only allow opponents to average 5.8 yards per pass attempt, which is 5th, and 10.2 yards per completion, which is 9th. They earn about 3 sacks per game, which is 12th, and have a 9.14 sack percentage, which is 11th. And both of these teams, as the year has gone on, have done a better job of getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Offensively, I think Penn State is better at running back. What they have with Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allar is slightly better than what Oregon has with Jordan James and Noah Whittington, but it's very, very close. I think James, by the way, is the best individual running back, but the feature back is kind of a dead position in college football. Having depth at running back is a lot more important than it used to be, while having a number one dominant back is not as important as it used to be. Those things have kind of traded off. So I think Penn State is better off at running back than Oregon is. I think, obviously, Tyler Warren is better at tight end than Terrence Ferguson and Kenyon Sadiq, and Penn State has depth there as well. At guard, I do like Penn State. They have one of the better guard rooms in the country with Sal Wormley, Cooper Cousins, J.B. Nelson, and Oliva Vega Ione. It's a lot of experience. Cooper Cousins is a true freshman, though, who has done well in his limited snaps that he's played. Oregon at guard, I think Nishad Strother and Marcus Harper II are good guards. And again, when Penn State or Oregon are better than each other at a position, that doesn't mean the other position's bad. Again, I think these are the top two teams in college football right now, with some of the highest ceilings and also some of the higher floors and average performances as well. You look at wide receiver, it's not even close, especially when Tez Johnson is healthy. Oregon, with Tez Johnson, Evan Stewart, Justice Lowe, Trayshawn Holden, is better than Penn State with Liam Clifford, Julian Fleming, Amari Evans, and also Harrison Wallace II. Oregon's also better at tackle. Anthony Dunco being out really hurts Penn State there. Nolan Rucci and Drew Shelton are good, but Josh Connerly Jr. and Johnny Cornelius are the best offensive tackle duo in the country. And I also think center Iapani Lololu has had a better year than center Nick Dawkins. But those are some of the better centers in college football as well. So there's no shame in saying one is better than the other. Both of these offenses, I think, are, and the analytics bear this out, they're both top 10 nationally. I think the only area where there is debate is QB. Drew Allar this year, 2,668 passing yards, 9.4 yards per attempt, 18 touchdowns, 5 picks, 167.5 passer rating. He's top 15 in QBR. Dylan Gabriel's top 10 in QBR, 165.1 passer rating, 24 touchdowns, 6 picks, 8.8 yards per attempt, completes 73.5% of his throws, 3,275 yards passing. He has 175 rushing yards. Allar has 225. I think that Gabriel's better on designed runs. Allar does a better job of maneuvering the pocket and getting scrambling yards from the pocket. I think that Allar has a higher ceiling than Gabriel, but also a lower floor. And on an average basis, they kind of perform at a similar level. Allar doesn't have the same receivers, but he also has better tight ends and also running backs who are better at catching the ball and better in the receiving game than what Gabriel has. So there's a good chance that whoever has the better quarterback in the 60 minutes this game is played, like who brings their A game at quarterback, will end up winning this matchup. It's not a guarantee, but it's a possibility. You look at Penn State here defensively. I think they're better on the defensive line. I think that Abdul Carter, Devon J. Thomas, Zane Durant, Dani-Dennis Sutton, Amin Vanover, Alonzo Ford Jr., they have so much depth there. And while Mateo Uyunglele, Jordan Birch, Jamari Caldwell, Derek Harmon, while they're good, I do think Penn State has better depth and also a better starting front four. You look at linebacker, Bryce Betcher, Jeffrey Bassa, and Tony Rose and Kobe King, I think are all pretty similar. It's the same thing in the secondary. Jalen Kimber, Jalen Reed, Zakee Wheatley, AJ Harris, and Cam Miller. They're similar to Nico Reed. Taisheem Johnson, Kobe Savage, Jabbar Muhammad, and Brandon Johnson. Penn State has been very impressive on defense. I think they're one of the better defenses in the country, and I actually think they are the best second half defense. I think if you are going to put an offense against all the defenses in America and you really lean on them in the second half, I think Penn State is the best second half defense nationally. They only allow opponents to average 3.1 yards per carry, which is 9th, and opponents to rush for only 97.2 yards per game, which is 6th. And they've played Ohio State before McLaughlin went down. They played Wisconsin. They played USC, who, as we have seen, has a very good rushing offense. I just think it took Lincoln Riley way too long to figure that out. They played West Virginia, who has a good rushing offense. They've faced other teams as well, like Minnesota. When they're on, Darius Taylor's very, very good, especially when their offensive line is on. And they've performed at a pretty high level, I think. They only allow opponents to average 4.3 yards per play and 266.9 yards. And opponents only average 0.226 points per play and 14 points per game. These numbers probably won't go down because I don't see either of these teams shutting each other out while dominating defensively, but I do think these defenses will come to play. And by the way, for Oregon, we talked about their offense a little bit already, but I just wanted to make sure I'm fair with the statistics here. They average 0.544 points per play. That's 8th. 36.2 points per game, which is 9th. They average on the ground 5 yards per carry and 177.2 rushing yards per game, by the way. And also, just like Penn State, they average 6.7 yards per play. So both the offenses and both defenses are pretty impressive here. I would say some key players to pay attention to overall are Penn State's Abdul Carter. and also Penn State's Zane Durant on the defensive line, and Oregon's Derek Harmon. Those are three defensive linemen that I think can make or break the opposing offensive lines. On the offensive line, pay attention to Nick Dawkins at center, and also Oregon center, Iapani Lololu, and the tackles, Drew Shelton and Nolan Rucci for Penn State, Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly Jr. for Oregon. Skill position players to pay attention to are obviously the quarterbacks, Dylan Gabriel and Drew Allar, but look at Tyler Warren for Penn State, and also Nicholas Singleton and Kaytron Allen for Oregon. Look at Tez Johnson, look at Evan Stewart, look at Trayshawn Holden, and also running back Jordan James, who runs with a lot of power and passion. And in the secondary and the defensive backfield, I would say pay attention to Penn State's, I'd say Jaylen Reed and A.J. Harris. And then for Oregon, that would be Bryce Betcher, who has been an awesome linebacker this season. I think these teams are pretty equal in the trenches. I'm not gonna lie. They're pretty equal there. I think that Oregon, though, does have the better special teams unit, better return game, better punter. Kicking has been about the same for these teams, some inconsistency, but it's overall been good. Oregon has two kickers, Andrew Boyle and Atticus Sappington. Boyle's kind of the long-range guy. Ryan Barker for Penn State's been able to hit a long of 49, so he has some power and is also a very, very accurate kicker. Hasn't missed one from inside of 40. So these teams, again, as I have said, are very, very, they're close together. They're basically the same team in a lot of respects. I do think that Penn State is the better defensive coaching staff. I think they have better assistants and also a better D coordinator. You look at head coach, I think that obviously goes to Dan Lanning, who has been better in big games and in managing key situations than Franklin has, and I also think he is building a better program than Franklin is. I think where there is debate is on offense and in strength and conditioning. You can give me any argument for who is better there. I think that both of these teams do a good job of the whole next man up mentality. They're deep at basically every position. Even at quarterback, I think Bo Pribula could win Penn State a lot of games as their starting QB. And I don't know if that's the same case with Oregon, but I do think that Oregon, for example, at wide receiver, like they can miss Tez Johnson, still have an explosive passing attack. They had injuries early in the year on the offensive line and were still able to have some success on offense. And also they were missing Jordan Birch and still did well enough on defense to stop Ohio State's rushing attack. So I think in strength and conditioning, they're both elite. And I also think that Andy Kotelnicki and Will Stein are the two best offensive coordinators in the country. I am picking Penn State here mainly because my model is telling me that Penn State is favored to win. Same thing with FPI. Because on one hand, I think that Oregon will win because their head coach is better, especially in big games. But the counterpoint to that is James Franklin's biggest problem is with Ohio State, and I think part of it's a mental thing. In the postseason, he's had some success against better competition. That's, in fact, where most of his success against top-end teams is the postseason. And it's relatively low pressure. If you lose, you're still getting a home game as Penn State. You're a lock to get a home game right now. A lock. There's only upside to winning this, getting the number one seed. So motivation, I think, is pretty equal here on the side of Penn State and also on the side of Oregon. But both of these teams, I think, will be loose because there isn't a lot of pressure here. I mean, if they lose, they're still getting a home game, still have a shot at a national title. And a point for Penn State, Oregon, I do think has the coaching advantage with Dan Lanning versus James Franklin. But Penn State has the better rushing offense. And more importantly, I think they have the better rushing defense. And I think it's clear that they have the better rushing defense. So all of that being said, these teams are pretty even. The fact that Oregon has to travel further than Penn State does, I think is kind of the tiebreaker here. It's the tie-breaking vote. And that's what my model thinks. That's why it's picking Penn State to win. If these two teams are to travel the same distance, Oregon would be favored on a neutral field. So I wouldn't be shocked if Oregon wins this game. This is not me doubting Oregon one bit. In fact, it would not come as a shock to me at all if they won this game. Same with Penn State won. So you have to pick one team to win, one team to lose. That's why I'm picking Penn State to win here by a score of 31-27. Penn State goes for more fourth down attempts and converts more fourth down attempts. So I think that Penn State, really what it comes down to is they will convert a fourth down or find a creative way to get into the end zone that Oregon may not do, because I also think that Penn State's defense is a little bit more conservative. And with how good their front four is, I think a conservative defensive plan to prevent big plays and force Oregon to methodically drive is going to help Penn State a lot. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Kyler OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Slade, Ismar, and Tyler Nye for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Rowing Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, Will Loftus for being All-Conference members. Have a great day, everyone. Make sure to check out my merchandise store, Patreon page, and Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. I will see you guys very, very soon. Thank you all so much for watching. Go Ducks and go Nittany Lions.